Hello. In the Bible reading, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they do a Bible reading schedule it's done in many different Christian denominations and many different Jewish denominations. And they recently considered the story of Samson. Now, we're not going to debate whether or not God magic could do any of the things that are claimed about in Samson's story. Harrison of the Truth Hurts channel did a great job breaking down Samson's actions and how he's not a good guy. He's not a good guy. The mental gymnastics needed to make Samson's actions fine are, Olympic level. There's two things that I haven't seen pointed out a lot with the problems with Samson's myth, and they're kind of important. First is human nature. For a little background, if you are not familiar with ancient warfare, this is going to be a little bit to get to the point, but it is important to do a little bit of a setup, because if you read about ancient warfare for thousands of years, basically going on up until the invention of gunpowder, even after that, warfare was basically the same wherever you were on the planet, whatever culture you were in. Depends on the climate, depends on the geography, there was some differences. But if you're looking at the warfare described in the Bible, this goes back to the Bronze Age collapse and continues up on until, post-Roman, medieval Europe, basically. So what would happen? Most areas, most governments were not wealthy enough to have a standing army. Rome and Persia were a bit of an exception because they had the money to pay people to be just soldiers. Most people, soldiering was a requirement from the government, but not your job. You were a farmer, and what would happen is your lord, whoever had the big house up on the hill nearby, would come around and be like, we're going to war. So, all of you guys around here who look able-bodied enough to hold a pointy stick, you're in the army. Come on with me. We're going to go do some training. They'd take you off, and there'd be some veterans around. They'd teach you how to poke people with a pointy stick and how to walk in a line and how to, maneuver and march and these sort of things. The lord, ruler, whatever his name was, would probably have a corps of guards that he could afford to pay, that they would be, these would be the highly paid, highly armored, shock force of the army. There'd be some veterans, some people who'd done it before, sprinkle those throughout. You'd have some lords who had done some warring before, and they would be, military officials, and you'd call up your buddies and friends, maybe pay some mercenaries, and now you got an army. And you go off to, raid the enemy. This is an important setup. The next thing that would happen is war. War happens. So what you would do is you'd have two sides. The armies would be moving around, trying to figure out where the other one was, figure out how far away they were, and you find a nice big flat area that you could array your troops out, just like sports teams in football. You're lining up your guys for the play. Football is very similar to how war would work. You'd have your front lines, guys with shields and swords, and have your back lines who are throwing stuff, rocks and spears and arrows and whatever. You'd have the two sides looking at each other from across the field. And guess what? Throughout most history and most cultures, people don't really want to die, and they don't really want to kill. You don't really want to get up close to another human being and stab them with a pointy stick until they stop moving. It's not fun. We generally don't enjoy doing that. And you don't want to be on the receiving end of the other guy's pointy stick. So the two armies would stay off from each other, shooting back and forth, hurting each other, until you met and clashed. And the goal is to break the other side's morale. You would flank them. You would break a hole in the line and break through. You would scare them. You would cause enough damage to them with arrows and bows and spears and poking that the other side would be like, oh, shoot, we're going to lose. We better get out of here. And as soon as that panic spread throughout the line, the formation would collapse. And that's when the army would rout. So the one side has successfully scared the other side into breaking apart. Now they're all fleeing. And this is where the majority of casualties would happen, is when they're running. Not a lot of deaths happen leading up to that point. When they run, okay, now we chase them down, and it's a lot easier to kill someone when their back is turned to you and you can poke them from behind, or you could ride up on them with a horse and whatever. People did not generally, in ancient warfare, fight to the last man. They did not generally fight to the death. That only happened when you were physically incapable of retreating. Even in orderly retreats happened a lot, where one unit would cover the other's retreat, and you'd be like, ah, shoot, we're going to lose. We're going to slowly back up, but we're not going to rout. If we can slowly back up, we'll cover this unit's retreat, and then we'll cover theirs. We'll work our way back to a defensible position. You retreated in good order, or you're routed. Rarely did you fight to the last man. It happened a couple times for the Romans, but that's when they were completely surrounded. It happened a couple times to various enemies of Rome, but that was when they were cornered against a river or the ocean or surrounded. You don't fight to the last man. Nobody stands there and is like, I better die for the cause. I'm not going to give in. You're like, oh no, my family and my friends are back home and I'm out of here. I'm not going to die today. See ya. And you run for it. This is the mindset of humans throughout history. Very few occasions where someone is insanely zealous, where they will willingly throw themselves into the meat grinder. It doesn't happen very often. Let's talk about Samson. Samson kills. That was a long setup, but it's important because we're establishing the mindset. You're not a professional soldier. You're not fighting for some grand, noble cause, usually. Usually you're fighting because you have to. And in the heat of the battle, you're fighting for your buddies. You know, your brother, your cousin, your best friend, your neighbor. You know these people because they all got recruited from your village. You're fighting to protect these dudes. You're not fighting for the glory of Persia. You're not fighting for the glory of your Lord. You're like, well, I don't want to die, so I'm going to stay in formation because that's the best chance I've got. Until you do the math and you're like, not the best chance anymore. It's time to book it. And then you boogie on out of there. So Samson brags about killing 1,000 people with the jawbone of an ass. We will assume that he was given impervious skin or like Neo-like matrix reactions where he's able to dodge all of the spear thrusts and sword swings and bows and rocks and whatever. He's able to get through this, or they just bounce off of him like he's Superman. Because if you watch any videos of someone on like PCP or something, where the police are trying to subdue this person, it can take like 12 people to stop this one person. Because when you turn off, self-preservation and pain in someone's brain, the human body is capable of incredible things. You are strong enough that your own muscles can break your own bones if you can turn those things off. You could try and lift something way too strong and snap your own bones. So we will assume, but eventually you will get overwhelmed. This one person on crazy drugs, 10 officers tasing this guy eventually will take him down. 1,000 people with long, pointy sticks. All they would have to do is surround Samson and just jab at him. Even if he's super strong and able to mow people down by the swing, you just keep shooting arrows at him. Eventually you will poke him enough and he dies. He did not, so we must assume that he has superhuman physical powers. The jawbone was obviously blessed by his divine patron, like a paladin, because no way that a bone would be able to survive slamming through 1,000 heads. We won't deny any of these very ridiculous claims of magic. We will question human nature because the witnesses have a unique-ish theological mindset. God does not interfere with human free will because this grand experiment We are in a grand experiment between God and Hasatan over who has the right to rule on high. And that requires that we have free will and can make free choices. So the witnesses don't believe in predestination or in general with God interfering with people's brains, because it kind of destroys the whole premise of your theology. Let's think about our military recruits for the Philistines. They did not have a standing army. They were not especially large. These would have been local farm folk recruited or press ganged into the army. Let's say you're that one guy, the hypothetical guy we have been discussing who's a farmer. Your brother, your brother-in-law, your best friend, your cousin, the guy you don't really like, but he's your neighbor, and you can rely on him in a tough spot. You don't hate him, but he's annoying, but you don't wish him any harm. These are all people from your village and surrounding village that good guys you like, guys that you have done you favors and you've done them favors. And now you are sent out to catch this one guy who's been kind of annoying to your rulers. You're like, this is boring walking around out here eating crappy food. My feet hurt. I have to sleep on the ground. My wife's at home and I can't get any. This sucks. Can't wait to go home when the campaign season is over. So you catch Samson, and he starts mowing through people like a lawnmower, like your men are grass, like a scythe, and just blood spraying everywhere as he just decapitates people left and right. We must assume this is how it went down. After you've seen him kill 100 people, 2, 3, 4, 500 people, 800 people, are you really going to be very motivated to run in and be like, 800 other people couldn't get this guy, but maybe I've got a chance to be the one that lands the lucky poke on this superhuman God man? That's stupid. That's really stupid. You are not going to convince me that at any point in history, in any place, in any time, that you are going to convince 1,000 people in this small scenario to go after one guy and just go into a human meat grinder. People did go into meat grinders. World War I is an example. But it's a bit of a different scenario. Whenever people have been forced to go to certain death, in scenarios like this, usually there's a cost-benefit calculus that goes on. Do I have better odds against what's in front of me or what's behind me, namely my officers or my lord or whoever? And usually what happens is when things look bad in that direction, you turn around and you're like, well, I'm going to poke that guy with my stick and I'm going to run for it because there's one of him. There's a lot less behind me than there's in front of me. I'm getting out of here. Coups were frequent. World War I, they were able to force people to go into the meat grinder because the people behind you had guns and machine guns, and they did have to execute people. There's a large machine behind you that is pushing you forward into the no man's land. This would not have happened in the hill country of the Levant during this period in the Bronze Age. That 1,000 guys was probably the biggest army that could be mustered in the area that you're in. There is nobody else. There's nothing to force you to go into this, and there's no particular loyalty, and there's no particular consequences for coming back. It's not like they would have hunted down deserters. They would not have willingly gone into a meat grinder where you've seen a single person who is apparently untouchable. You would be a god. You would be like, oh, it's a god. We can't fight a god. We're going to run for it or worship him or something. I did a quick back of the napkin math. Maybe it's poetic, but Samson talks about so he built 2 heaps of bodies, 500 human corpse heaps. They're maybe at least 15 feet tall, probably. Are you going to tell me that the 999th guy is going to climb up a pile of his dead bodies trying to get Samson, and he's not going to run away? That's dumb. It's really dumb. It would not happen. And the only scenario that could make this happen is if God interfered with people's free will and forced these people into the Samson meat grinder, which violates free will and is not great. Makes kind of an evil God. We're like, I want Samson to have a really good story. So I'm going to remove these people's sense of self-preservation. And they're just going to throw themselves into Samson and die. Not really cool from God. The other scenario where this could happen is if Samson had cornered them, let's say by a river that you can't ford, or in like a valley of some sort. You know, he's got them in the back of a canyon. They can't get out. He's just like, he's working his way through, and he's eventually going to get the last guy. And just like, you know, he's just turning them all into marinara sauce with his magic powers. That's evil. Either of the two scenarios we have an evil God, or we have an evil man who has gotten his powers from God, and God continues to give him those powers, so he must approve it, and therefore an evil God once removed. Human nature. This would not ever happen. Ever. Never, ever, ever, ever. It is ridiculous to claim that 1,000 people in this time period, in this scenario, would just throw themselves into this sort of thing. Wouldn't have happened. It's crazy. The other scenario this could have happened is if he did it incredibly quick. You know, before they can even react, Samson has mown through 1,000 guys and the rest of them hightail it out of there. In which case, again, it is evil because his power level is so high that he can do it before these people have a chance to assess the situation and retreat. It is Superman massacring normal humans, which makes him evil. Samson would be evil. It's dumb. Second problem with Samson. So at the end of Samson's story, he is blinded, but he's gained his superpowers back. The kryptonite has worn off, and now he has his super strength back, and he prays to God, please let me commit suicide so that I may kill a bunch of these people. And God grants him his wish, which seems contradictory because that's a sin. Killing yourself is a sin. So like praying that you may successfully commit a sin and then having that answered, I can't quite put it into words, but that seems theologically thorny, first of all. Second problem with this. It gives the number of people in this building as 3,000 men and women. It's a party. Samson has already shown his ability to kill an entire army, either nearly instantaneously or, cornering them and then butchering them. He has shown his ability to kill an entire army with an improvised weapon. Why wouldn't Jehovah just allow Samson's eyes to grow back? If the problem is that Samson can't see, why not just give him new eyeballs or echolocation, or just like, and then Samson could, even though he couldn't see, he could see through the power of Holy Spirit, and Jehovah allowed him to grab a serving fork, and with that serving fork he struck down 1,000 more Philistines and made 3 heaps of bodies. Or Samson gets his sight back and he busts through the wall Kool-Aid Man style and runs for it and is back to fight another day. Why does he have to go out in a blaze of glory? The reason is because it's a story. But this scenario is really freaking weird. It's really dumb. He has his strength back. If God can create miracles to the point of giving him, we can assume, invulnerability and superhuman strength, and at the end of his jawbone slaughtering, Jehovah causes the ground to rip open and there's a spring there for him to get a drink because he's really thirsty from all of his butchering. Jehovah can do these sort of miracles, give him super strength, whatever. Why not give him, Daredevil's echolocation abilities or new eyeballs? The reason he commits suicide is because he's blind and can't see where anybody is, which makes him vulnerable. Make him not blind, and then he would live. And he would also not have to commit a sin of suicide. And he could continue judging, because he'd escape. And he could continue going on doing more things instead of just getting squished. If you're granting miracles, give him new eyeballs. It's not like let him become a weird suicide bomber, martyr thing. Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if you take it literally. Theologically, mythologically, literarily, it makes sense. It's a story. It's constructed very much like stories about Hercules. And then he came here and he diverted a river to wash all of the poop out of the barns. One of Hercules' 12 great deeds. Samson's story reads like a story because I can think of a bunch of scenarios where he could get out of this. If he knows his super strength is back, why not grab the little Philistine boy and be like, if you don't tell me where I'm going to go, I'm going to kill you. I'll crush you. So you're going to be my eyes, and you're going to guide me out of here, or else I'll squish you. And he gets away and he gets back to Israel. Or he prays to God for new eyeballs. Like, this story doesn't make any sense. If he has this power, this level of power, that with his one action, with his one deed, he could, bring down a whole building and squish 3,000 people, which is horrifying by today's standards. There's probably a bunch of slaves and people in that building that didn't want to be there and weren't evil. They were just forced to be there because they were enslaved. They got squished too. People's babies, pregnant women, they were probably there. It's a big party, big religious thing. People probably brought their kids. People were probably pregnant. Were those babies and children evil? Jehovah made the rubble fall down in ways that wouldn't squish the innocent. Doesn't say that. It says he killed them all. Everybody in the building. Men, women, we must assume some children, and probably people that didn't want to be there and weren't aligned with the Philistines. Why not just help Samson escape? Why end this way? There's so many other ways that if he is so amazing and powerful and important, you could keep him around a little bit longer. He could get away. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It doesn't hold up to the behavior of humans in the real world. Literature and stories, sure, makes sense. We got a story, we got a theme, we have a character arc, but really, come on, this is goofy. That's my two things I wanted to point out about Samson. There are numerous problems, but a lot of those get down into theological debate, an interpretation of the text, and those are weedy, thorny things, and Harrison covers a lot of that in his video. But these two things, human nature and why didn't God give back Samson's eyeballs, I think are pretty big plot holes. Pretty big plot holes that Samson is genocidal and evil, or God is brainwashing people. Those are the only two ways to explain the body count. And why God allows Samson's prayer to commit a sin to happen. Hide him from theologically. Give him eyes. Let him hear. Let him sense things. Something. Seems weird. Seems like a myth. Because it is. So, that's my thoughts on Samson. I like ancient warfare. I think it's interesting. I don't enjoy it, but I enjoy reading about it. It's interesting. This story is silly. So, witness theology is dumb. Another addition to that ongoing series. Their interpretation of this is dumb. I've heard much more interesting interpretations. Don't believe them. Don't think it happened at all. Didn't happen, but much more interesting from Jewish rabbis who have a different take on this. See you next time.